Hi, and welcome to the Total Recall Show. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design. You can follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli or on Instagram at Tom_Scioli. And please support my Patreon. Go to patreon.com, search Tom Scioli, and you'll see the various comics and things that I've been working on for the past year. This video is about the movie Eternals. It'd been nice if it was called Jack Kirby's Eternals because the comic that the movie's based on, and it's the main point of interest for me with this movie is the Jack Kirby connection. It's the first movie adaptation of a sole Jack Kirby comic. When the Captain America movies come out, it says, Captain America created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. When the other Marvel movies come out, it says, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And then in a lot of cases, it'll say created by Stan Lee, Larry Lieber, and Jack Kirby. That's like in the case of like Thor in particular. And nothing wrong with any of those things. I mean, I feel like Jack Kirby's name should come first, but that's just not how it is. And I think it should, if it's not going to come first, it should at least come second before Larry Lieber. But again, okay, that's what it is. But these sort of comics like the Eternals, which are created just entirely 100% by Jack Kirby, this Eternals is the first one, and it's like that's super cool to see on the screen based on a comic by Jack Kirby. No two ways about it. And it's sort of kind of almost like a companion piece to like New Gods. The comics at least. This Eternals movie was further along into production than DC's New Gods movie, which then got New Gods movie got scrapped, and so Marvel's just sort of steamrolling all over DC and Warner Brothers or whatever, and they're just not even trying, I guess. Eternals, it's one of my favorite of Jack Kirby's comics. It's maybe the most psychedelic of his comics. It's sort of the comic that I'd say most captures the sort of like psychedelic poster imagery that he was making in like the late 60s through the 70s. There's like actual like the characters, the costumes of the characters, particularly Icarus in the comic. It's a pretty ornate costume. It looks like one of those like ornate drawings that he would do as one-offs. It's like and then the space gods, the celestials, are like these like super psychedelic machines, and Kirby had comics that would have like maybe a character that's kind of that intense here and there, like a Galactus or something, but this was like kind of like the ultimate one of having just like panel after panel crammed with these just like wild Kirby-esque designs. It's Kirby being Kirby, and so as a fan of Jack Kirby, it's like I just love it. Like I love it visually, I love it thematically, I love the audacity of it. It is kind of like a series you put next to New Gods, because it's kind of like New Gods is like the DC version, and Eternals is the Marvel version of like Jack Kirby trying to create this sort of like god pantheon, this like mythology, this like story of the history of Earth, in sort of like a sci-fi comic book fantasy. And it's easy to make comparisons and things. New God, like they were both short-lived. They both were canceled a lot sooner than sort of like the series that we're kind of familiar with Kirby that tend to run for like 8 years, 10 years, or like in at least the Kirby run, and then in a lot of cases they're just these comics that like are still running today. Like Captain America, Fantastic Four, X-Men, Hulk, things like that. New Gods gets canceled after 11 issues, but New Gods was sort of part of like a larger narrative that included Forever People, Mr. Miracle, and then also sort of tangentially Jimmy Olsen. So, if you like discount Jimmy Olsen, there's like 30 some issues of the sort of New Gods. You got the 11 issues of New Gods, 11 issues of the Forever People, and then like 18 issues of Mr. Miracle. And then later on, he does sort of like a, Hunger Dogs graphic novel and like, and then like one other like, extra length story. So like the page count of New Gods is higher than Eternals. Eternals came out at a time when Marvel Comics were 17 pages long. It came out like, a couple years after New Gods. So instead of a 20-page story or a 24-page story, or sometimes even a 26-page New Gods story, you just get 17-page Eternals stories. And I think there's 19 issues or 18 issues. So again, short-lived. So it's just not as, the page count's not as high as New Gods stuff, but it's super dense. And you could sort of tell that like by this point in his career, Kirby had a couple of, cancellations, series that didn't get to like reach full fruition. So when he got like another chance to do a sort of like God epic, he was not taking any chances. And so like the storytelling in Eternals is super accelerated, super dense. It's a very potent brew, and another reason why I love it so much, like why it sort of stands out from the rest of his work, kind of like a high watermark. Now the one thing, and this will kind of, I guess maybe like relate to the movie, is that like the characters in the New Gods series and related series, characters like Orion and Darkseid, like just as a fan, like I really connect to those characters. I'm really invested in those characters. I really love those characters and have like definite ideas about like who they are and what they're about and stuff. Where with Eternals, I'm really interested in sort of like the ideas. I'm interested in this universe. I'm interested in the visual aspects. I'm interested in like this philosophical aspects and intellectual things, but I'm not really as invested in the characters. Like, Icarus is kind of like the titular character and maybe the one I have the most connection to or whatever, but it's not the same as like a connection to like Orion or Mr. Miracle. And then even like the sort of secondary characters like Ajax or Makari, it's like, not like Ajax looks super cool and, he serves his purpose in the plot. And then Makari, again, is, kind of fun or whatever. But like, I just, don't really like give a shit about the character. Like, and Kirby doesn't really explore, those characters in the same way that he, explored characters in previous works like New Gods or Fantastic Four or Thor or whatever. He kind of just like it's like I said, it's sort of this like warp speed narrative, huge ensemble cast, and so like everybody doesn't really get their moment, but like just like the way the whole thing works is great. I'm just not as invested in the characters, and then the stars of the show, like the real sort of like innovation that comes out in the Eternals is the Celestials, these sort of the space gods, as Jack Kirby calls them. And so you sort of have this like pantheon of godlike beings who are like the Eternals, but then those gods have their own gods, have these like even larger, more enigmatic figures that they are sort of in awe of and subservient to. And so that's kind of like a new thing, like a new wrinkle that is like super cool. And they're just designed in this like amazing way. And then they're the way they're presented is like just so epic and amazing. They're sort of like these giant like robot gods, and they have these helmets, and you don't know what they look like, and there's all these references to like, oh, what do they look like underneath and stuff, and they're silent. I don't think they ever have like a speaking moment in any of the comics. I think maybe there's like moments where maybe there's like a voice in somebody's head, or something, but you never hear like a voice. There's sort of these like silent, massive, enigmatic beings that are all on like various missions throughout through the earth, and like you don't know exactly what their mission is, and they're just sort of doing these like these odd things that you can only guess at, only contemplate, and then somebody will attack them. In one issue, it's like Russia. They launched like a nuclear missile at it. Then in another issue, like shield agents throw grenades at it, or another issue where like the deviants will like shoot it with lasers or whatever. So like it's like they're going about this like weird business that you don't know what it is, and then somebody attacks them, and then they do some kind of wild thing. And so so that's kind of where the comics at. And so the movie, again, I was like excited to see it because wow, like this is the first Jack Kirby soul creation thing, and if it and as a fan of Kirby, like if this thing does well, it kind of like it's like kind of Kirby getting his due, because Eternals and New Gods and those were sort of as far as like fan perception goes, or like industry perception, were like considered failures. They were like, hey, they got canceled. They Kirby, when he's all by himself, he's a little too out there. Kirby, you get caught up in your own, like those were the kind of things people were saying about it. And for my money, these are his best works. These are like the ones where they're like completely unique, like invigorating, exciting, reading experiences. Like I don't know what other people are looking for in comics, but that's what I'm looking for is what he does in things like the Eternals and like New Gods. And so the fact that this series that was dismissed as a failure and out of touch and corny or whatever is I don't know, like 45 years later is being this like sort of multi-million-dollar motion picture. Like I think that's great, like for the story of sort of Jack Kirby's creative life. I think that's really awesome, and if it's a home run, if it's a great movie, or if it does really well, then it's like that's like a feather in Jack Kirby's cap of his reputation or whatever. It's not like there's always the asterisk of like, oh yeah, Jack Kirby's great and all, but he needs a Stan Lee or he needs a Joe Simon. But it's like the things he did with those guys were great, but he doesn't need anybody but Jack Kirby. Like he's this fully realized creative entity. So that was really cool, and I hope a New Gods thing comes to fruition. Sort of the closest we have is the Zack Snyder Justice League cut, which I loved. I thought was great, and heavily features Darkseid and the whole Apocalypse crew of the New Gods, and like seeing the trailers for it and the advanced stuff. And it was like one of those movies that was supposed to come out like, I don't know, like a year and a half ago or something, and the pandemic happened, so it keeps getting pushed back. So it's had like we've had like all this like extra time to kind of like overthink and overanalyze like the trailers and the design and this and that. So it was very like picked apart under a microscope to a degree I haven't really seen for like a new movie, and just like whatever frustration and whatever like people have with like just this whole Marvel juggernaut or Disney or whatever. It kind of got like focused on this one movie, but just for my money, just sort of seeing the trailer and stuff, it was like, okay, yeah, like this visually looks very different from what Jack Kirby created. I can see like little design flourishes and things, and it didn't like that didn't like bother me or anything. Like of course, yeah, like I love the visual of those Jack Kirby comics, and boy, would it be really cool for someone to do sort of like just like a direct adaptation of what those Jack Kirby stories were, with all the costuming and just like the color and the brightness and the psychedelia. Like, yeah, that would be super cool. I'd love it, but that's not what this is. And it's like, and I get like I'm a creative person myself, and so I get it when you're you get the job to take on one of these franchises or whatever. You kind of like you're trying to make the best possible thing you can, and that's not necessarily going to be a direct adaptation of what it was in the comic book form or whatever. Like it's like you bringing your worldview and your reaction to the source material to it. It's not and so I mean, again, like for me, like when I was like I kind of see like the Transformers versus G.I. Joe comic series that I did, and GoBots, I always kind of thought of them as like Transformers versus G.I. Joe was my New Gods, and then GoBots was like my Eternals. Like New Gods is kind of like the beloved property. Like it is, it's more obscure than X-Men or something. Yeah, sure. But it is kind of like beloved, and the people who are fans of it, it's like really beloved. Where like Eternals is more like, like you love it and it's cool, but you're not like invested, you're not like invested in the internal life of the characters, maybe with like a few exceptions. Like, and I think part of that is that like Kirby was at a different stage in his career and had different things to say, and Eternals was in some ways it was like Kirby's he was kind of doing like a deconstruction of the superhero genre that he had been part of his whole life, and a deconstruction of these sort of like God stories and stuff. And so he really does like play with your preconceived notions and expectations in the story, where it's like in the comic, like Icarus is like, or Icarus or Ike Harris is like the character that's in the corner box. Like he's the guy there. So it's like, that guy's the hero, that guy's the main guy. And so as a reader, you tend to kind of like imbue him with that. And then every step of the way, that's being like sort of undercut. He's being sort of humiliated, and people within the story are kind of, making fun of him for being sort of like a blowhard. And he's sort of like bumbles his way through a lot of situations and stuff. So it's kind of like it undercuts that. And so when you sort of undercut that sort of central hero figure that everybody's focus is on, and that they've been conditioned to focus on, when you start to undercut that, a lot of interesting things can happen, and the story becomes about other things. It becomes about the peripheral characters. It becomes about just like the world of the thing. Like, so that stuff was really interesting. It's and also it's like I personally and I think like we as whatever sort of gravitate towards melodrama, sort of here's the good guys, here's the bad guys, and let's say yay for the good guys and boo hiss the bad guys. And New Gods has a little more of that, and again, Kirby does, even within that, he is trying to like sort of undercut things, play on expectations, have surprises and reveals. But with Eternals, it really like it is like okay, here's the hero, and you're ready to say yay, and then like a bunch of like kind of interesting things happen to make it like not so simple. And then it's like, there's the villains, boo, and then it's like the villains are like Crow. I'm thinking in Eternals particularly, Crow, his whole thing, and his sort of relationship to the deviants that he's part of. I guess like sort of the pathos in Eternals is sort of like the sort of relationship between Crow and Thena. That is like, that kind of sticks with you. And then Thena and the Reject and Carcass. So these are like sort of the characters that form like sort of the heart of it. Like, and they're sort of like characters whose story sort of arrived at, a little further into the series. And maybe they emerged maybe almost, as an unexpected surprise to Kirby or something. But but it's like, your sort of heartstrings get pulled, and you're kind of like, follow them, where prior to that it's a little more analytical, a little colder. But again, I'm interested in that kind of stuff too. And these are the kind of things that like tend to come out in like the mature work of a mature creator. At the point Kirby was in, you kind of get this sort of like a little bit of cynicism and world weariness that is kind of awesome. So anyway, so like very different works, and so you have the movie, and just sort of seeing how different the movie was, and then sort of hearing people kind of complain like, this doesn't look like Jack Kirby's Eternal. Like I don't know, just based on the trailers and things, and it got me thinking that like, well, I mean, Kirby is, there's more to Kirby than just squiggles and little dots and square kneecaps and stuff. Like there's more to Kirby than just sort of like the design elements or the design ticks. Like he has his themes and his characters and his sort of worldview, and that like it's kind of like this like awesome compliment, that because like sort of previously it would be like, oh yeah, Kirby's all he's a great artist, yeah, does these great pictures and stuff, but who cares about his stories and stuff. But it's like no, his stories are these great things, and so like let's treat them like Shakespeare or something, where somebody can create like a new work that doesn't just sort of copy the surface elements or whatever, but like takes on like the themes and the underlying things, and creates something like incredibly different from that, like that. And so like I sort of thinking that way, and it's like this could be like really interesting, just seeing Kirby explored in that manner, like really confronting his stuff and paying like a respect to his work, as opposed to just sort of like raiding one of his old works for wallpaper. So yes, I sort of approached it with that in mind. The movie just really enjoyed it, from just like, it's like, yeah, like again, it's Eternals is one of those comics where it feels like, hey, I think I'm the only person who likes the Eternals. I feel like maybe I'm like the number one Eternals fan, and it's like, and of course, like there's a lot of things like that where it feels that way, but then, you find out, of course, there's, it's way more than just you, but, and even like New Gods kind of felt that way for a while, but now it's kind of at a point where it's like, I don't know, like it feels like it belongs more to, but like Eternals. So like I'm watching this movie and they're talking about the Deviants, and, there's, and there's Sprite, and there's Icarus, and there's, and Druig, and it's like, wow, it's so like wild to see a movie, that has like, that in there. And then like seeing the way Chloe Zhao kind of, addressed the material and was inspired by it, and like it seemed like like a very serious artist, a very serious director, just like a very serious creative person, doing confronting this like Kirby work and coming to terms with it, and then creating something out of it, and how she sort of like addressed the things. And it's like from sort of the first moment, it's like there's this like little opening crawl or whatever, some opening little verbiage, and it was like, okay, kind of laying down like, okay, here's what the Eternals are about, and they come from planet Olympia. And I was kind of like, oh wow, that's different, but I like it. I like, like almost kind of like making them more like the New Gods, which seems to be how these Kirby like Marvel movies are approached. Like Thor, it felt like they put a lot of like New Gods into the Thor movies. It was kind of like, oh yeah, they made the Eternals like a little more like the New Gods in that sort of opening crawl. And then like Kirby does in the comic, sort of has these surprises and undercuts your assumptions and undercuts your surprise twists and reveals that sort of like undercut, your expectations of like this, this superhero genre. And it was just kind of cool seeing Icarus flying around shooting those lasers out of his eyes, just like he does in the comic. And yeah, I mean, Kirby's comic was a deconstruction, playing with expectations, undermining, the heroics and the heroism. And again, like this movie does the same thing. Like it was like, that was like a piece of the puzzle of like the Kirby original that they took. And then also like, this movie is like a reaction and an interpretation of Jack Kirby's comic, but then Jack Kirby's comic was sort of like interpreted and reacted to, by creators, at Marvel after it had finished. Like it's kind of, so there are like, like different elements and things that were explored. So like, but sort of like my main engagement has been with like the Jack Kirby comics, and then, Neil Gaiman did a series in the early 2000s. So I kind of like, engaged with that, and he was engaging with the Kirby stuff. Again, he was sort of, including some other things that came after, which, I'd also sort of read, like, particularly, like Walt Simonson did some stuff with like, one of the this sort of like sleeping Eternal and stuff. There's like a character in it, Gilgamesh. And I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I don't know, like that name sounds familiar. Like, I mean, beyond just like the familiarity of like the Gilgamesh and Enkidu, but like, yeah, I kind of remember there being like an Eternal named Gilgamesh that like it was like a later thing, like after Kirby. But then, and there's like this one character that shows up in like issue 13 of Eternals is like, that's like the great issue. And it's kind of like, Jack Kirby, like the series is building and building and building. And then issue 13 is just like, whoa, it's just like amazing. It's like the best that the series gets. And there's this character that's introduced in that issue called the Forgotten One. And he, is like, character you haven't heard or seen anything about up to this point. And he, lives in this sort of like dark corner of Olympia when all the other Eternals are sort of engaged in forming the Unimind. Sprite is like sort of left to watch, watch the store and mind the store. And so Sprite needs some help. And so he enlists the Forgotten One, who, and then when he goes on his mission, he gets this like super cool looking armor and stuff. And so like, I really loved that character too, kind of this like enigmatic character you don't know much about, like a Boba Fett type or whatever. And then, after I'd seen the movie and I was kind of like looking up this and that, I saw that like, oh, Gilgamesh, they later, later on, other creators in the comics gave a name to the Forgotten One, and so the name was Gilgamesh. So it's like, oh, and it's like, oh, cool, like, that kind of like, oh, okay. Again, you have like Icarus, who kind of fits the hero archetype, and they make references within the movie about him being like Superman or whatever. And in a certain way, this is like a chance to do like another like super team. So it's like you had the Avengers, and so now this, and it is kind of like based on like the archetypes of, the Justice League or whatever. You have like a speedster, you have like a Flash character, and then, Icarus is like the Superman character. And they, and he does, like at one point in the movie, somebody says, oh, you look like Superman. And he does look like the Henry Cavill Superman, and he flies around and he's invulnerable, and he, shoots, vaporizes people with lasers that come out of his eyes. So, but yeah, he pulls the focus. Like, you're like, oh, that's the guy. And then, as the story goes on, you find out that's not, like they do interesting things with that expectation. It's same as Kirby did. You're kind of watching, and you're like, oh, that's like Thor, or that's like Orion. So you're expecting certain things, and then, those things don't happen, or different things happen. Kirby's comic gets cut short. So like there's those first 13 issues that are just like amazing and keep building and building. And then they're like, Kirby, where's this fit in with the Marvel universe? You got to have some guest stars. So then the Hulk shows up, and it's like a robot Hulk, and it's like, and so the series kind of turns into shit for a little bit. For a couple issues, it's just kind of like incredibly mindless superhero beat 'em up stuff. Kirby's had his moments in his career where he would do like an issue, here and there, where it's just like, okay, we don't know what to do this month. Just have like a big fight or whatever. But usually there were some kind of like stakes or some kind of, character things going up. But this was just like just this dumb fight that lasts from issue 14, 15, 16, I think 17, and then 18 and 19, issues 18 and 19, the series gets back on track, becomes interesting again, but it does become less of this like kind of like intellectual kind of like ensemble piece, and just kind of becomes like a Thor or a Adventures of Orion of the New Gods kind of thing. Like it becomes a little more melodramatic, but it's still it's really, really good. It's just not quite what it was prior to the Hulk stuff, and it's not as bad as, it's not like it is really good. It's just kind of like really good in more of like a standard Jack Kirby superhero mode, which I don't know if he just kind of like naturally ended up there, or if it was kind of like like trying to make it a little more commercial, but anyway, so it gets good again for those last two issues. But we don't really get like a resolution. Like he sets a lot of like really interesting things in motion. The 40-year judgment, which or 50-year judgment, the 50-year judgment. Yeah, I think it was the 50-year judgment. So it should be wrapping up in a couple years. We should be getting that thumbs up or thumbs down from Arishem, which reading the Kirby comics, I always thought it was pronounced Arishem, like Arishem. His name is Aris, or and it kind of like Arisen or something. But in the movie, they were saying Arishem, which then like my thought was like, oh, like Hashem. Okay, that's awesome. That's really cool. So we didn't get a resolution. So it's like, the movie, you kind of get an opportunity to have that, and like as much as sort of things were sort of changed for this movie, you can kind of like see like almost like a Jack Kirby version of like these same events that they do. So there is like the idea of like, okay, the Eternals are sort of like here to serve the space gods, and the space gods are going to either give the thumbs up or thumbs down to humanity, and like either like give us their endorsement and maybe give us some sort of zap, like good zap, or some kind of new technology, or some kind of like evolutionary jump start or something, if we get the thumbs up. And then if we get the thumbs down, they're gonna just erase all life on Earth and start over. So it's that like where Kirby was going was probably that at a certain point, when this judgment is given, the Eternals are gonna have, there will be fighting within the Eternals, of some of the Eternals being like, hey, we serve the space gods, and if they want to erase mankind, then so be it, and we should probably even help them. And then other Eternals who of course are going to be like, no, we got to fight the space gods. So and like again and again throughout the series, they show how disastrous it is to turn against the space gods. So it seems like, okay, that's probably where Kirby was going. So the movie gives you that. It gives you that again, like some of the details are a little different, but kind of gives you that. And then also like in the comic, Kirby sets up this super cool thing called the Unimind. And it gets this big buildup, and all the Eternals from all over the world sort of gather together, and they merge into this like one being that's like this hive mind or whatever. And then super cool Kirby visual, and one of the great Kirby visuals, and kind of floats into space, and this Unimind is going to figure out what to do about this whole space gods thing, and the deviants and all this stuff. As all that stuff sort of happening in the comic, then it's like, okay, time for the Hulk to show up. So the Hulk shows up, and like the Unimind dissolves, and then you get some kind of like quick, kind of like whatever kind of explanation, and then we're on. So it's like we don't get to find like it. I get the impression that Kirby was going to have like the Unimind kind of pay off in some big way, and we never get to see that payoff because the story gets sort of course corrected. And then like maybe Kirby would have gotten back to it at some point, but then the series gets canceled not too long after. So we never got. So like in this it's kind of like, close out comes up with like a use, like in plot terms of like, okay, here's what the Unimind is going to be, and it's going to serve some kind of purpose, and then here's the purpose, and here's how it's going to play, and it gets to play out, like a lot of the things in this movie felt like they fit kind of like Kirby's train of thought and his sort of his ambitions and his kind of like large scale epic kind of cosmic thinking, and also the sort of world weariness and kind of like cynical kind of aspects too, like, so like another one was like, again, like like Crow is very different in the movie, and he doesn't, like, I don't think he's ever like named as Crow anywhere other than like the credits or like on the Lego set or whatever, but they do have this sort of like confrontation between Thena and Crow, and again, like, the circumstances of the movie are very different than the comic, but it's kind of like you could see how something like that would have been part of maybe Kirby's ending of like, Crow and Thena are sort of, they were an item, they're like lovers or whatever, in the past, and now they kind of find themselves on, opposite sides of things, and I think even Thena, like in the comic, says something of like, what we had together is no longer, it's done, and so that, like the idea that like, okay, this thing of like, okay, at some point they might have to face each other in the field of battle or whatever. So you get that in the movie. Like, again, even though it's set up in a different way, it's still kind of like, yeah, I could see that sort of growing out of, Kirby's thing and being like sort of a natural consequence of what Kirby set up. And it has the movie has the scale and audacity of Kirby, and it's got the, sort of like giant hand emerging, from the earth. And so it has this like cosmic scale that we haven't really seen to this degree in a Marvel movie, and is, the kind of stuff that really is like associated so much with Kirby, this kind of like, larger than large kind of thing. And even there's, kind of like the MacGuffin or whatever of like this like creature, this space god emerging from the center of the earth and stuff. And that's like so Kirby. Like there was like a Super Friends episode that Kirby worked on, and I'll do a separate video about this, but I'm sort of convinced, just seeing some of his other Saturday morning work, that like some of those Super Friends episodes seem to me like Kirby coming in with just some kind of sketch or whatever, and the the writers or whatever taking that sketch and then making like a script around it. And so there's one episode that really feels that way, because again, this is like sort of pre-Ruby Spears. This is him at Hanna-Barbera, but like that's pretty much what we know he did at Ruby Spears. He would have all kinds of assignments, but sometimes he'd just like draw and like, okay, here's like a giant snake squeezing a building or whatever, and then it's like, oh, hey, let's make an episode where that's what happens. It's like a Super Friends episode where the moon splits open and this like giant Kirby creature, comes out of the center of it and attacks the earth. And so like this thing of this like space god, coming out of the center of the earth, that's like, so Kirby. And even like within Tales of Asgard, he sort of has that of like, Surtur or somebody kind of like ends up in the center of the earth. And again, he's like just playing off of Norse mythology, but it's still like it's within like the Kirby bag of tricks. There's sort of one thing in the movie that kind of like again, like I enjoyed the movie, like it all works as a whole. I enjoyed it. I was caught up in sort of the drama and the surprises, like I liked it more as it went on. It builds, which I think is like, that's like a good thing in a movie. There was just like one thing that kind of like struck me sort of the wrong way, and like, I don't know, maybe that's good or whatever, maybe not, but it was kind of like, there's this moment when you get the sort of like reveal of like, okay, here's what you thought was happening, here's what's really happening, and then, they sort of see the, like Cersei sees like a vision of like what it was like when the Eternals were like made, by the Celestials, and they look kind of like these these like sort of half-made robots and stuff. And that kind of like took me out of the movie for a moment, because it's like, if you say they're made by the Celestials, that's one thing. But if you like show it and they look kind of like robotic, then like these characters that had up to this point been like really like well fleshed out and really, like you were kind of like really seeing them as like, real people and really, buying into them, like to kind of see them that, oh, well, they're just like robots underneath or whatever. And then they do address that in the dialogue too, like where it's like, hey, we're just robots or something? What? Hey. But it's kind of like, it's like, it's like to see it that starkly, it did kind of make me kind of stop identifying with these characters as much, and kind of, and again, I was able to kind of get back into it, but it did kind of throw me for a loop. And I thought, like, if you took that out, I think like the thing would still work. You'd still have the shock and the surprise, but like you'd also still kind of, view these characters as people as opposed to like, robots. And even like just from like, Battlestar Galactica or something, like you can have like synthetically created beings that underneath aren't like, wires and gears and clockwork or whatever, like that are, that kind of underneath look just like us. They just happen to be synthetically made, but would be sort of like molecularly indistinguishable from from a human being. Anyway, like it's a minor thing. And again, you can get into like, there's conversations you can have of like, hey, the characters that we like care about the most in Star Wars are like the two robots or whatever, like I get, but I don't know, felt like you're trying to put over this new super team that like you haven't met or heard anything about up until this point. You're trying to put them over, and so that kind of like, I feel like that kind of like detracts a little when you're like, oh, by the way, they're the robots. It's like, yeah, okay, we saw the vision, but again, it's like, these are things that are just being like sort of thrust in front of us, and you're like, oh, by the way, they're robots. But again, it's part of a movie that is sort of built on surprise, and also takes advantage of the fact that these aren't like beloved characters that people grew up with, that like, they watch Saturday morning cartoons, or like, it's like these are pretty obscure. If you're like a huge Kirby fan, or like if you're into old comics and 70s comics, like about them, or you might like them and enjoy it, but they're not, it's not like, it's not like like you're able to do things with these characters, which they do in the movie. They take really good advantage of that you couldn't do with Superman or even Batman or Captain America or whatever, and yeah, just the thing of that, like it's the most psychedelic Kirby comic. The costumes are most like the Kirby psychedelic. Like Icarus's costume is kind of cool because it is like sort of like, it's a little more streamlined than Galactus's. So like you can sort of draw it like 100 times or whatever in different poses and stuff, but it's still, pretty ornate and pretty like specifically Kirby, and I would have liked the more psychedelic experience. I would have liked it. And even like there's a scene in the movie where Kingo is performing like a musical that's about Icarus, and so he's wearing like this sort of like jazzed up version of Icarus's costume, and it's like that would have been a really nice opportunity to go all out Technicolor and be like, and have him in sort of this like bedazzled version of like the comic book one where there's like reds and yellows and blues and lightning bolts and stuff, like that would have been a nice little tribute. Like that was like a good opportunity, but again, it's like whatever, you're going to do what, works for you in the movie you're making. But like, that would have been really cool. Like kind of like what they did in the Captain America movie, where he's got sort of this like tactical Captain America outfit, but then it's like, he's doing this like showbiz stuff, these sort of like USO shows. And he's got like the like 1940s Jack Kirby, Joe Simon, Captain America costume. It's like, yeah, okay. Like that would have been, and even like in that little like musical segment, it's just Kingo wearing like an Icarus costume, but like that would have been a really cool opportunity to do like the whole Eternals crew, have actors and actresses playing like musical versions of like everybody, and then you have like Macary's helmet, like bright red outfit with the helmet, and of course like Ajak. Like Ajak has such a wild costume. Again, straight out of like Kirby's psychedelic poster art, this sort of, like Aztec sci-fi superhero thing. And like, I get it. It's a lot. Like it's, this big thing. It's, very unwieldy or whatever. I understand why you can't have, your character like walking around like that in a movie where you can in a comic book. But, would have been cool, again, maybe in that musical segment, have like, that, or, have Selma Hayek's costume like something close to that, something like hers was pretty different, and like again maybe her costume's like based on one of the comics. There's like a lot of comics, and I've seen a lot of like various things that they've done with the Eternals or whatever, but like, and I'm thinking like when Selma Hayek like signed on for this movie, and like they showed her like, oh, here's who you're going to be playing, and show her the comic book, and you see Ajak, and he's got this like massive headpiece and this Aztec superhero costume. I'm sure she kind of expected that she'd be wearing some version of that, and that might have even been like the selling point, where it's like, yeah, I want to wear that, how could you resist that? Like, that's like, yes, I've never seen anything quite like that, and you want me to wear that, I'll wear it. Where do I sign or whatever? Like that. This is my imagination here, of course. Who knows if that actually happened? But it is kind of like, I could see being kind of disappointed when like she gets like her finished wardrobe, and it's just kind of this like I don't know, like Princess Leia, kind of headdress or whatever. Like not even like the cool Amidala kind of thing, but like some of the more like toned down like Padme. Kind of like headgear or whatever. And so that was one of the things with like the Eternals comic, was like, oh, how's this fit in with the rest of the Marvel universe? And Kirby wanted to keep it separate, but they kind of said, you got to tie it in somewhere here. So he would tie it in like to as like minimal a degree as he could. And I'm like really shocked in a good way about the restraint that they had with the movie, of not like, it's like you're trying to sell these new characters, and it's like, I would have fully expected them to include the Hulk, maybe, like, just like how the Hulk was in the original Eternals, and kind of ruined the original Eternals. Like, like, I'm surprised, like, they didn't have like sort of a handoff of like, because it's like, okay, Tony Stark's dead, Captain America's dead, but it's like, hey, it's me, the Hulk, hey, what's up, guys, and and then have it go from there. But they did have a tie-in character, but it was like an extremely obscure character who hasn't been in any of the movies yet, and it was sort of like a surprise that this character was at like an established Marvel guy. Like that did surprise. Like they kind of like let them stand on their own legs a little bit. Like it felt kind of like fresh and new, and like uncharted territory in a way a lot of these Marvel movies haven't, where like a lot of unclear where one starts and the other begins, and kind of like the Neil Gaiman series kind of like was like, it's all these Eternals, kind of these sort of obscure characters, and then like Iron Man shows up, and he's and kind of has a role, like, and again, they couldn't use Iron Man, but like somebody could have showed up. So like the biggest crossover was like this super obscure character. I mean, I don't know how spoilery I want to. I'm trying not to get too spoilery, but it's like, yeah, it was like, hey, it was the Black Knight, for what if that means anything to you. I could have sworn, having seen like the trailers and stuff, I could have sworn Oscar Isaacs was an Eternal, but I guess I'm just like, from seeing like the Dune trailer and this like I guess I got my wires crossed, and Oscar Isaacs was not an Eternal. We got a spoiler coming up, so while we're waiting for this, spoilers coming soon, so just get out of here if you don't want to see a spoiler or hear a spoiler. But so in the meantime, while we're waiting for this spoiler, like in the comic, they look like superheroes, but they're not exactly superheroes. There's something else, something more interesting, or and they did that in the movie and nailed it. Like, they definitely like that came across, just like, yeah, very true, very true to the spirit of what Kirby was doing. And again, like that's probably the most important part, like again, I would have liked to have seen some of the superficial Kirby elements, but you can't, if somebody wants to sort of have a conversation with the soul of a Kirby work, like that's awesome. That's great, and maybe the better way to go about things than. But again, I'm visual. I'm a visual person. I'm into the visuals. So yeah, like it would have been cool. And again, like that kind of stuff. Like hopefully, like I hope this thing's a success. Like it did well, but I hope it's a success just because if it's a big enough success, it'll make it that much easier for like a Jack Kirby New Gods movie to get made, and then it'll be that much easier to sort of delve deeper into the Eternals, and maybe we'll get like a like an animated Eternals episode, an animated Eternals movie, or like an Eternals episode of What If or whatever, where we get to see those Kirby designs. Like that Icarus costume is like maybe one of the best superhero costumes in the history of comics. And for me, like the best, like Kirby's best costumes to me aren't always like his most popular. And sometimes they are, sometimes it intersects, but like to me, like Icarus has like maybe the best costume Kirby ever came up with for like like a superhero kind of character. Just like a perfect balance between complicated and simple. And another one that I put up there as like one of Kirby's best costumes, possibly the best, is Fighting American. Fighting American has this great, like his costume is way cooler than Captain America's, but like Captain America's the icon. He's the one we know. So it's like, it's not necessarily like, I love Orion and I like Orion so much more than I like Icarus, but Icarus definitely has a cooler costume. I love Orion's costume. Again, like Kirby has like his sort of simple costumes, then he has his super complicated costumes that you can just kind of draw once, and then you kind of rough out after that, and then he has like Icarus is like this perfect balance. But anyway, so maybe we'll get like an animated one where you get to see that full, which are, like if you're trying to draw like a Superman comparison, the Kirby costume is like the Superman colors. It's red, blue, and yellow. It's like primaries and stuff. But yeah, so here's like the big post credits whatever kind of thing was like it's the post credits, and then Pip the Troll shows up, and it's like, oh cool, okay, and then he's like, hey, here's my buddy behind me, and so you see him in silhouette, and you're like, okay, here comes Adam Warlock. Okay, Adam Warlock's coming, and then he steps out. And it's Star Fox or Eros, one of those like Starlin characters, one of Starlin's Titans, which sort of like after the fact were kind of like tied in with the Eternals, but that wasn't how they were introduced in the beginning. They were sort of like a separate thing, but then there was some like retconning. I'm not clear exactly when that retconning happened. I think maybe in the early 80s or something, but yeah, Starlin has his pantheon, which again, ironically, is patterned after the New Gods. And it was something that like Starlin did as like a college project. He created this sort of like New Godsy kind of like pantheon of like superhero gods. And in it was Thanos, which was like very much influenced by Kirby. So you had Thanos, Eros, you had a Mentor, and then they were the Titans and stuff. And so these were things, that then became, part of it. So anyway, this character, Eros, later called Star Fox, because I guess Eros was like too whatever to be like a superhero name. I don't know why they changed him to Star Fox, but he was Eros, and then he became Star Fox later. He steps out, and the crowd like went insane. Like this movie played really well with the audience that I was watching it with. People were like laughing at the funny parts, and kind of it played really well. It sounded like people were like really into it. And when Star Fox stepped out of the shadows, the crowd went insane. And I thought like, okay, like Star Fox is this like super obscure character, but I don't know, maybe he was in maybe he's like Loki or whatever, where like, he has some kind of like cult of personality that's come out through the movies that I'm just not familiar with, that like, or maybe he was like, part of like one of these, Marvel TV shows that I haven't watched all the episodes of, like I haven't watched all the episodes of Loki. So like maybe he's a big deal in Loki, or maybe he's, a big deal in like Falcon and Winter Soldier, which like, I haven't watched all the episodes of that either. But then, but everybody went nuts. And then like I sort of found out afterwards that it was like, oh, it's Harry Styles. That's why everybody was going up. Like, I don't know what, like I kind of have like a vague idea of what Harry Styles looked like. I didn't I don't like, he had red hair here, and I know he doesn't have red hair in real life. Like the character had red hair, so it was like, that was kind of one of those like funny moments where I felt like kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm definitely like out of touch. I mean, I never said I wasn't. That and thinking Oscar Isaacs was an Eternal. Those were the two things. So I just liked, I liked, I liked what they had, and I liked the deviants. They were pretty cool, like the way they were depicted, and just this like idea of like, the Eternals and where were they at various points in history, and probably could have done more fun stuff with that, but like what they did kind of it like kind of worked and fit together. I just kind of had to get these thoughts down while they were still fresh. Like me and Matt, my co-host, are gonna probably do another Eternals episode where in more of like our normal format, where we'll sort of talk back and forth, and maybe some other stuff will come out of that, and I'm interested to hear his perspective. He hasn't seen the movie yet, but like I had to get it. Like this movie was important to me, like just as like a huge Kirby fan, like it, like that was like the big thing to me with it, and like whether I ended up enjoying the movie on its own merits or not was almost immaterial to me. And I actually did. I did enjoy it a lot. It's like where would I rate it? It's not like my favorite Marvel movie, but it was really good. It's not my least favorite. Like it's somewhere in the middle, like maybe like a little better than average. And I liked what they did with it, and it felt like a complete statement. It hung together really well. It looked different from the other ones. And I think like probably the biggest thing with it was I felt really connected and invested in these characters that, and maybe part of that is, just because, my connection to them, from knowing the Kirby work, but I feel like a real effort was put into just like whatever like little amount of time you're spending with these characters to just really like their humanity comes across. And that's like, and I feel like a lot of it was the casting that like, you get like a lot of bang for your buck from these actors, like especially Druig. Like I was kind of surprised by that, because he doesn't have very many lines. He's not in the movie a lot, but like he just kind of, there's something there where like you really just kind of connect with his character, and like the little things that he says and does kind of like speak volumes, and yeah, it is kind of funny again, like kind of feeling like a little out of touch, where it's like, okay, Sprite is played by a child, and that kind of makes sense in the context of like, the comics and even what Kirby did. I think like when Kirby's Sprite was like modeled after Danny Kaye, and and so I can kind of understand why you might want to freshen up the reference, of this character or whatever, and Neil Gaiman sort of tied Sprite into like, like Peter Pan and stuff like that, which they sort of used in this. Like Druig. So when I saw Druig, when I would see the stills and stuff and see Druig, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. I wonder why did they make Druig a child too? Like I understand Sprite being a child, but why is Druig a child too, or whatever? And then it's like, after I saw the movie, and so like I look it up, and it's like he's 29. So it's like I thought it was like a teenager child actor or whatever, but like, okay, this guy's 29. It's just like I'm at that phase in my life where like a 29-year-old looks like a kid or whatever. But he was like super interesting casting, because like these Eternals, they're kind of like, they're these like immortal beings, and they're like exactly like, what they were, a million years ago or whatever. That's how they look at. And so he was like really interesting casting, because he does look like he's like a teenager, but then he also looks like he's like in his 40s at the same time. Like he's got this kind of like, like very interesting face, and like kind of like this like gravity, which was like, I think really good casting for somebody who is playing like like someone who is eternally youthful, someone who's like a million years old, but also like in the prime of their life, so that was interesting. But yeah, like it was just like there was just like a really good chemistry in the cast, and just like a really good energy, and like just sort of separate from like my Kirby fandom or whatever. It is kind of like, yeah, I really like these characters, and I want to see more of them. And then even, when they behave in ways that aren't, heroic or exemplary, like you're still kind of like invested in them. And yeah, like Kingo, Kamal Nanjiani's character, like has been like the sort of like the focus of people's like sort of like goofing on this movie before they've seen it. Like he's taken the brunt of that. And again, like he was great in the movie. He was great. He was funny. He was sort of like, he was funnier than the material even. Like, like they sort of had him playing this sort of blowhard and big ego, and in a lot of ways some kind of like cliches, and like there's sort of like the like speaking to the video camera, kind of like there's like, hey, I'm filming a video and here's me like talking to the video, like kind of like stock situations that could be like, dumb or whatever, like or could maybe be funny, but just kind of like, in a predictable way. But he like, I mean, he's a great comedian, a great comedic actor, and like, you could tell there was a lot of ad libs in it, and the ad libs were like, really funny. I laughed, the audience laughed, like he was spot on, and he was doing the superheroics, and he was being funny and doing the superheroics and stuff. So like he was great. All the shit he's taken online or whatever, it was like bullshit, because he was great in it. He was a highlight of it. So those are sort of my like thoughts that are, those are the thoughts that are shooting out after having seen this movie. Again, like big victory for Jack Kirby, and for Jack Kirby fans. I kind of like when they first started making sort of like these superhero movies with like the X-Men and Spider-Man and stuff, and it looked like, oh, now they're doing this. Now I thought like, man, if they ever do an Eternals movie, that's when you're going to know, things of like really, the world has tilted on its side, and like here we are, like there is an Eternals movie. The Eternals, big, marquee Eternal, like it's I don't know, maybe you saw it coming, like maybe it's not a big deal to you or whatever, but like I remember the days when it was like, kind of like Jack Kirby who, and it's like, who gives a shit about anything Jack Kirby did without Stan Lee, like that was like sort of the world I lived in, and the world has sort of turned into this other thing where there's no such thing as too obscure a thing to become like a blockbuster, which again, like Guardians of the Galaxy definitely knocked that door down. That was like when they were talking about Guardians of the Galaxy, it's like, okay, I guess like here comes Marvel's first flop, because like nobody gives a shit about the Guardians of the Galaxy, and then boom. So I guess that kind of like paved the way for an Eternals, and so we're just basically like every single Marvel comic that ever existed is gonna be a movie now, as long as there are movies, but it'll get some kind of like adaptation, live action adaptation. Now, if only the same were true of DC. It's like there should have been a New Gods movie way before an Eternals movie. Like New Gods are way more important to DC, and way more important to like comics fans, and way more important to Kirby fans than the Eternals. But we got an Eternals before we got a New God. So come come on, DC, get your shit together. Why did you, put the axe on the New Gods movie that Ava DuVernay and Tom King were working on? Why? Like, come on. Like I've heard some excuses and some stories. Sounds like bullshit to me. Come on, let's get that thing going again, because, it's, the world needs it. I saw a bunch of really cool movies that have come out lately. I saw Dune, I saw Eternals, I saw Last Night in Soho, I saw The French Dispatch. I liked Eternals better than Dune. They were all four of those movies were great. I liked Eternals better than Dune. I liked Last Night in Soho the best out of all of them, and then French Dispatch second after Last Night in Soho. So, which isn't too bad for a Marvel movie. I do enjoy the Marvel movies, but a Wes Anderson or an Edgar Wright movie, they're going to be better than a Marvel movie. But I like the Marvel movies, and this was a pretty good Marvel movie. This was pretty good. Trying to think of Marvel movies that I've seen twice, like in the theater. I saw all the Star Wars sequels, like all the J.J. Abrams and the Rian Johnson Star Wars movies. Saw all of those like twice, or at least twice in the theater, maybe more times in the theater. Really enjoyed those. And then I think I saw Captain America, the first Captain America, twice. I saw Infinity War twice. I think I might have seen Thor twice. I think there might have been one other, but like those are the ones I saw twice. And I don't think I'm going to see Eternals a second time in the theater. Like maybe, but I don't think so. But it is like the ones that I've seen twice, like Captain America, it is like, because I'm really enjoying seeing like all that Kirby stuff up there. Like Captain America felt really true to the comics and the Kirby stuff. And I just like felt like, I need to see that again to go on that ride again. Eternals not really feeling like Eternals. I went on like an emotional journey with the story. Great, good, awesome. But there's not like these like, amazing set pieces, or like, oh, it's like one of the comics come to life, or what. Like there's no real moment like that. Like again, action's cool. It's all, but I don't feel like I gotta go see it. Where, Captain America, different story. Thor Ragnarok, different. Like Thor Ragnarok was probably like the most psychedelic Kirby of the Marvel movies. Same way that Eternals is like the most psychedelic Kirby of the Kirby comics. I've said most of the things that I wanted to say about this movie. Anything that I've forgotten, maybe I can bring up when me and Matt talk about this movie. So this is the Total Recall Show Eternals episode. I'm Tom Scioli, author of Jack Kirby, The Epic Life of the King of Comics, and Fantastic Four Grand Design. Please support my Patreon. Go to patreon.com and search Tom Scioli. Follow me on Twitter at Tom Scioli, and follow me on Instagram at Tom_Scioli. We'll see you here for another Eternals episode with Matt. So this will hold you over until that one.